day I chose not to let anything win but my drive to get me to the top.
Frank Lee made the beat.
What it do, KTTV? This is KT, and I'm coming at you live with another episode of the Daily K Podcast. And on today's episode, we have Dr. Kevin Marks, one of the doctors at Premier Gastroenterology. How you doing today, Doc?
I'm blessed. I am excited to be here. Thank you for asking me to join in on you to have some conversations about gut health and stress.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. So many changes going as we're recreating education in a sense. Me with the chronic disease, and also just knowing so many teachers who are, developing stress. I got a teacher, her parent, she's going through some of the things from stress of just going through Lake Charles. And so losing
Yes,
everything on top of what she's been going through with her stomach. I figured that it'll be a great Wellness Wednesday to get out to everyone, just so they can really get more information on how important that connection is and maintaining that balance.
absolutely.
Yes, sir. And
Absolutely.
so, before we do that, I like to get into a wellness check, just for you, Doc. And so, as a doctor who's seeing patients, or even in your daily life, how have you been staying safe throughout the pandemic?
Well, I've been trying to follow the science, Kendrick. I've been trying to use my own good clinical judgment based on my understanding of how pandemics affect people. Viruses need a host to clutch on to so that they can stay viable. And so what I've been trying to do is just really reduce my direct person to person interaction. And so professionally, what we did is we've really taken a very conservative approach. We've gone essentially all virtual in terms of patient to physician visits. So instead of having patients come into the office, the patients get to stay either at their house or at work or wherever they are, and they get to connect with me virtually, just as you and I are connecting virtually. And we found that we haven't really lost any ability to diagnose because we still are able to do testing. So I'm able to order labs and patients go and have their blood drawn. I'm able to order imaging, and I'm able to even do endoscopy. But when we do endoscopy, that's when we have all the full gear on, patients wear masks. So that so far has been quite effective. Now, has it made for everybody to be happy campers? There are some people who just really, have a greater safety or comfort level feeling that if they can reach out and touch their doctor, that the encounter is more effective. But that's not necessarily the case. So we've not opened our office back, and we've minimized our direct patient to patient exposure. Yes.
Yeah, that sounds like it's gonna be the best way. I recently started looking into more telehealth stocks, and so I looked into Teledoc.
Yes.
And so
Yes.
it's been kind of running, as we look at where we're going back into the
Yes.
pandemic. Also, LabCorp, it was down. Now it's starting to run back. So, just a few
Yes.
places that's coming back alive in the medical industry, but it's all about telehealth and not really face.
Yeah, telemedicine is here to stay. It's here to stay. I'm convinced. In fact, I saw it evolving over the last 1 to 2 years. And so last year, I went to a conference at the American College of Gastroenterology, and they had a specific lunch and breakout educational session, specifically on how to incorporate telemedicine into your practice. So that was last October. And so we went live with a pilot of telehealth in November. And so between November and March, I was already doing it, but just in a small number, so that when I was out on spring break, when the pandemic really broke loose. And so when I returned, I had a bunch of office visits that we just flipped the light switch and converted all that to telemedicine, and it worked very nicely. Of course, there were a few kinks that we had to continue to iron out, mostly on the customer, on the patient side, because what I've learned is, doing it on a cell phone isn't quite as reliable of a connection as doing it computer to computer in a Wi-Fi or high speed environment.
That is true, man. And so, Doc, I see the Xavier shirt, and I know
Yes,
you've
sir.
been in practice for a while. So, Louisiana Saints fan,
Sure.
and
Who
so,
that?
can you give me a little bit of background just on you and what even guided you into this field?
It's a very it's a story I'm often asked, and the short version of it, Kendrick, is when I was finishing up high school, my main focus, I wanted to be a musician, a jazz musician. So if you want to study jazz, you want to be around jazz, where do you go to school? New Orleans, right? So through various interactions, I ended up choosing Xavier. And I was not a music major at Xavier. However, I ended up becoming a pharmacy major. And I played jazz while at Xavier. And so I graduated there with a pharmacy degree in 1991. And then I went on to the world, and I figured I needed to get some life experience. And I did clinical research in pharmaceutical sciences. And and then a few years into that, I something just told me you need to pursue going to medicine, and so I threw it out there. And next thing I knew, in 1996, I was starting medical school at Meharry Medical College, and I did 4 years of matriculating there, and from there. I came to Houston to do my internal medicine residency, and that took 3 years, and then 3 additional years I stayed at Baylor and did gastroenterology training. hmm it's been a path. It's been a path, but it was through God's guidance that resulted in my being here. I'm
Yes, sir,
convinced of
man.
that.
And hey, man, I appreciate you for it.
Yeah.
Hey, so now when we think of that, and the road that you went through, um, what are some of the instances of adversity that you faced? And as you go to conferences or you go to schools and check in on young doctors, how do you kind of steer them away from some of those pitfalls?
Oh wow. I can tell you that, for me, one of the biggest adversities along the way was, even though I got some life experience between, finishing college and finishing and going to medical school, there was about a 5 year gap there. And the longer you stay out of your academic environment, the more difficult it becomes for you to get into professional schools like medical school, right? From test taking and all of that stuff. So, I mean, I had to overcome some obstacles and making sure I met the requirements to get accepted into medical school. I mean, now they look for a lot of, candidates who are very well rounded, who aren't just bookworms, but who volunteer, who do community service, who are able to have effective communications, and who are able to connect with people. So those are the characteristics that medical schools are looking for their future doctors, because which makes sense, because as you're taking care of patients, you need to be able to communicate effectively with them. You need to be able to empathize with them, and you need to be able to connect on a human level, not just this old fashioned I'm the doctor, you're the patient type of level. I view me being as an individual's doctor. I'm your medical advisor. Just like we have financial advisors and spiritual advisors, I'm your medical advisor. We make decisions together, right? With you in the driver's seat. I provide you the information. Yeah. So I tell young people to, when you're an undergraduate, when you're in college, no one expects you to, have a 4.0 for everything, but let your actions be intentional. So if you say you want to go to med school, you need to make sure you work hard in college, but don't just be just that bookworm. Get involved in other organizations, volunteer, make sure you really know what you're getting into, because it's a pretty strong commitment. When you get in medical school, you're on average 22 years old, 21, 22, and you basically vanish from the face of the social community, from the social earth, right? Because your friends are out there hanging out. Your friends who didn't go to medical school, they're out hanging out, starting their families, traveling, seeing the world, and you're somewhere learning the digestive system or learning the cardiovascular system. You're really grinding. And once you get in med school, the clock starts ticking and the debt starts ticking. So when you get in there, it's costly. It's a very costly endeavor. But you want to make sure that you're not just incurring costs, is that you're actually investing in your future. And so you want to make sure you finish that degree so that you'll be able to pay for many people have, take student loans. You want to be able to pay for those student loans, because if you don't finish and yet you have all this debt, you're still going to have to pay for that debt, even though you don't have your MD degree, right? And so, I just try to encourage them to make sure that that's what you really want to do. And if that is what you really want to do, you surround yourself by like-minded people, and you exchange information, you volunteer, you just help with your own development.
Powerful, Doc.
Yeah.
Powerful words, man. So now, as we jump into just talking about this stress and the connection it has to our gut, when we think about what's going on now, just in the world general, but moreover in the world of education, um, unless you have a chronic disease like mine, I feel like you really don't understand how much importance it is to keep your brain healthy, to keep your stomach healthy. And so, before we go into it, can you explain a little bit about that connectivity and why we must manage the stress we put on our bodies?
Yeah, it's a very intricate um, relationship, and it's not been perfectly understood, but science has shown that there is a neuronal connection between the brain and the gut. It's called the brain-gut axis. So when we're under emotional or psychosocial stress, there's some nervous release of neurohormones, neurochemicals that may cause your digestive system to either become excited, and your muscles react in a spastic type manner, which we perceive as cramping, um, or just the opposite. It could lead to someone pumping the brakes on your digestive system. In addition to that, stress can affect the community of bacteria that lives in our gut. Normally, there's this thing called homeostasis, or balanced between the good and the bad bacteria in our gut. And so there are theories that stress can lead to an imbalance whereby there's more bad than good. And when there's more bad than good, that alters our ability to digest foods, to exchange nutrients, leading to inflammatory cascades where the lining of the gut become inflamed. It's a very intricate dynamic, but we do know that it's manageable. There are studies that show that when you are able to better regulate the stress, the gut issues calm down, as in conditions like ulcerative colitis and Crohn's disease. Um, Flare-ups usually come about during stressful periods, so there's definitely a strong relationship there.
Yeah, I think about that in my world. Usually I could count the time of when my sickness is coming, and so I'm talking
Hmm.
like every when we start closing out the year every March, because I was on the rodeo committee for three
Hmm.
years, and so every time it comes down, one of those years I was at the doctor.
Yeah.
I mean, one of those weeks out of my 2 weeks, I was at the doctor each year. And so the year that I didn't supervise special ed, which was so crazy toward that time, I didn't go to the doctor. Here we are, year two. I'm still fine, you know. And so I think about those times of just letting that stress overcome me, and then the reaction my body has to it. And I come
Yes.
back to, and so then when we think about that, and I think you said the parasympathetic nerves or the fight or flight. And
Hmm.
so to me, it feels like when that happens, your body thinks you're about to get eaten by a tiger. And so if you keep that excitement up all day, then that's what your body really thinks. And so then, like you say, the digestive system is sometimes just shut off. And
Yes.
so that's when we get our bloating. That's when we get things like the cortisol. So
Yes.
when you have people like that in your practice, what are some of the practical things you tell them to kind of get themselves back on track before it gets deeper?
The first thing I think you have to do is try to identify precipitating factors, right? So if you identify that you're really not sleeping well, you're because of the stress, you're responding to it with either overindulgence of things like alcohol or caffeine, coffee. Those things can further exert their influences on your digestion. If you can, find. I always try to get my patients to find a way to um, turn off the stress. And now, that sounds very easy to do. We know it's not, but there are certainly some things that you can engage yourself in. A hobby, something just to kind of calm your brain down. So I'm a big fan of music. And so music has been, clinically shown that it leads to release of endorphins, which are like happy hormones that um, allow the stress hormones to calm down. Start exercising. That's always something that is a way to relieve stress. Make sure you get a good night's sleep. And if you're staying up till 2 in the morning, you're waking up at 6. Cumulatively, that's going to catch up with you. That's just going to compound your level of stress because now you got fatigue that's playing a role as well. Eating healthy, you can't run through that drive-through when. I know it's fast, it's quick, it tastes great, but the processing of that food is gonna contribute additionally to some of your digestive mishap.
Man, that last one hurt. That last one hurt, man. That drive through, you got
Hey,
it will get you.
hey, that Whataburger, huh? Or that Popeyes, or what have you.
I'm talking about, man. I have to think about that. I follow Principal Kafele, and so we was trying to get together to be able to do a podcast together. He's real big in education as far as writing books and things like that. But one of the things he said was, man, as a principal, it was a go 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 world. I would go
Mhm.
by McDonald's, grab something, go in the building, didn't eat lunch, grab something on the way home from another drive-through. Before I know it, bypass. Uh, so, yeah, I got to be on
Yes.
point, Doc.
Yes.
So,
And that's something I think COVID is not necessarily trying to teach us, but
mhm,
that's something we should be learning from COVID is that, during this, especially when we were during our lockdown period, we couldn't go, right?
mhm,
And we had to rechannel that energy, hopefully, to more positive things or self help things like exercising. People started preparing their own meals
mhm.
because of the fear of going to takeout or what have you. And that's always, it's intuitive that's always better than eating out a lot.
Yes, sir.
And just the act of cooking and preparing is therapeutic.
Mm,
As long as you're not pressured to cook. I think
yeah. No, well, it's nothing like being on that grill and just sitting out there under that shade and letting it roll.
Absolutely. And I'm telling you, as a Louisiana native, we take pride in our cooking,
Yes,
and
sir.
especially when we can elicit the reaction from people and it's good.
Yeah.
That gives us some joy.
Yes, sir. So now, as like I say, just thinking about educators. So we just finished, and
Yes.
how do we want? And I want to say, let's not talk about it when we have the symptoms. Let's focus on being proactive. And so when I think about that, one of my ways is probiotics.
Yes.
And so, as we know about the probiotics, they also have prebiotics.
hmm
And so, if you can talk to me about those, and how will both of those really help me in the long term?
Well, together they help restore that balance of of the bacteria that lives in our gut. Prebiotics are Imagine probiotics being actual bacteria that you're replacing, good bacteria. And prebiotics are the nutrients that feed the good bacteria so that they can uh, uh, be more predominant in your gut bacterial community, right? And once you have that balance, it often helps reduce the amount of you know methane gas production, which causes a lot of bloating, um, di, mal exchange of nutrients. So you may become deficient if you have a poor balance. You may be losing nutrients. Nutrients may be leaking through your gut, and you ultimately become deficient on certain nutrients. Water is something that usually our gut uses to help process things, but usually the water that passes through the gut is recirculated through your colon and goes back into your bloodstream. But if there's a poor interaction, if there's a poor environment that may impede the ability of that water to be reabsorbed, then the net result is what we call diarrhea, right? And so that's why if you get something like food poisoning, E. coli, it's diarrhea because there's so much going on. It's not allowing that water to be recirculated. And so probiotics, I'm a big fan of probiotics. Do you need to take them every day for the rest of your life? Probably not. Uh, will you benefit from taking them in pulses? Maybe, a month at a time, 3, 4 times a year. That might be as good as taking it every day. There's not really any proof that one is really better than the other. There are some that have been studied more in certain conditions, like inflammatory bowel disorder, that clinically, due to the science, we're able to recommend, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's better than others that have not been studied. So I try to encourage, especially when patients come in with maldigestive disorders, to try to get on a probiotic regimen. Prebiotics, that's one that I don't, necessarily routinely suggest that you go out and buy a prebiotic to feed the microorganisms. But there's some data that suggests that they can be helpful.
Okay. I love doing the podcast because I learn so much because I've learned how to become such a great just listener. Not thinking of what to say next, but just listen. And so, Doc, you just enlightened me about diarrhea. I did not know. I did not know how it happens. I knew it was water, but now you think about the mechanical workings of it and why it's so important to keep that environment healthy. Like you say, that
Yeah.
puts it on a new light for me. So just things like that changed the way. That was big. Okay, and now as we get ready to land this plane, Doc, as we head into flu season, we're starting to see cases rise. We
Yes.
got physicians that are coming in, and maybe if they're not in the gastro area, it's a different area. But as a veteran, I would say this is for you. They're seeing so much sickness and death. I see so many interviews where doctors are crying. They're literally breaking down. Um, in your experience of just being in this role for so many years, and tough times come and go, how do they make it through instances like these and still staying attracted to the field?
That's a powerful question, Kendrick. Uh, all physicians aren't exposed to the saddened aspects, of COVID. My hats go off to my colleagues who are really, we're all on the front line, but there are some people who are like really, really on the front line. I'm talking about our hospital-based colleagues, intensive care physicians, nursing staff, respiratory therapists, emergency room doctors, nurses, and I think for me as a gastroenterologist, we're not as front line as those colleagues. Um, I think you have to be really, really well grounded in your support system. You have to have a strong support system. Your family, your friends. You got to communicate. You got to talk this out with people. You can't just go home and soak yourself in sadness. You can't just because it'll consume you if you do that. You can't resort to substance abuse. While it certainly can, there are, I'm sure, people who have done that. It can certainly put you into a depressive mode. But I think between your social support, your faith, and your hope that this will not be here forever. At least at this magnitude, that has to drive you. We're all passionate about what we do, and I know that the people in the emergency room and the intensive care units, they're very passionate. That's what allows them to get up and go there every day. And I'm certain there is this phase of burnout, the COVID burnout. But we get tired of COVID, but COVID doesn't get tired of us, as they say, right? Um, there are a lot of support groups that are forming since COVID hit, and I hope that my colleagues are at least participating in some degree with those support groups.
Powerful, man. You got to have that level of support, and you have to because it's things that I deal with at school that if I don't come home and talk it through, then it'll eat me
Yes,
alive. So very
yes,
good, powerful information for your colleagues, Dr. Marks. I appreciate that. Really, for anybody who dealing with the stress
yeah,
of it.
yes.
Really,
Yeah,
yeah.
it doesn't. This stress isn't just impacting those of us in
hmm
healthcare, right? It's
hmm
every sector. No stone went unturned when COVID
No,
was
sir.
looking at who to mess with. My hats go off to all of those of you who are in education, because now we're learning that, kids do have the ability to spread. And, many of us, many of those of you who are in education, you guys aren't, necessarily 19, 20-year olds. It's the 35, it's the 45-year-old, and many of which have underlying comorbidities that may put them at an increased risk of having an unfavorable outcome if they were to contract COVID infection. It's tough. It's tough, but which we have to follow the science, and we have to make sure that we embrace technology and use it constructively, and we have to. We all have a responsibility to protect one another, right? And all of our actions, and as much we have to make sure that our actions aren't purely driven by desire. Desire is something that makes us behave irrationally sometimes, right? I really want to go hang out at this restaurant, and I just really want that steak. But really, is it wise that you go sit in that restaurant that's crowded with people? You can't eat with your mask on, right? And you're just going to inhale all those respiratory droplets. You got people in there coughing, you got people in there choking, you got people in there laughing, talking loud. And so there are going to be, as people keep going out, hanging out in restaurants, there are going to be more and more cases. And that's what we're seeing now at this moment. At least the CDC published a report that shows that indoor restaurant dining is one of the biggest environments or sceneries for COVID transmission.
Yeah, thank you. I think I'm gonna look at how I play into my Sunday. I appreciate that, Doc. Now, if someone wants to contact you at Premier, and they want to come in and kind of talk about the good health, and look at you as becoming the physician, how do they get in touch with the company?
Oh, it's easy. We have a very easy website, www.pgkaty, that's P as in Paul, G as in girl, KATY.com, www.pgkaty.com. There you can fill out a link. You could click on the link that will ask if you want to become a patient or you want an appointment, and then a member of my staff will reach out to you, call you, and help you schedule an appointment. Right now, as I mentioned, all of our appointments for the most part are virtual, and then from there we can decide what level of testing needs to be done. But a consultation is very easy to achieve to set up.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. And before we get out of here, who y'all playing today? Now, who does New Orleans?
I haven't even looked,
Okay.
to be quite honest. I've really been somewhat disconnected from football this season, Kendrick. One, mentally, I didn't see this season starting. And so they started it, and I was like, really? That's kind of careless. That's kind of reckless. But I understand what's driving that. And so I haven't been as into football this season as I have been in other seasons.
Yes.
I'm sure I'll figure out how to watch the game sometimes later today, but I'm not so much the point where I know who's playing who.
Okay.
And I was, being that I live in Houston, I support the Texans. I was very, very disappointed with the Texans earlier this season for reasons that
Yeah.
And now that they've remedied that, I think they'll be able to reel me back in.
Yeah. We'll see how Romeo do here. Get a little bit of that experience in there. All right, Doc. Man, I appreciate you for taking some time out today and really giving some great information to the listeners. Stress and the gut and that connection is so important to just be mindful of, because a lot of issues can be solved before they get to you if they can mitigate.
Yes,
but if not, I'm glad you were here to give them a guidance, a North Star today. And
let me say this, Kendrick. if you give yourself a self-diagnosis and say, oh, I'm having abdominal pain because I'm under stress, if this abdominal pain persists, even after your stress level kind of calms down, maybe there's something else going on. Stress I say it's a large exacerbator, or it worsens a lot of conditions, but it's not necessarily the primary cause of a lot of conditions, right?
Mm.
So I want to be clear there. Stress definitely can heighten our senses of awareness of certain things, and it can also heighten the way things actually function, or it can worsen the way things function. But it shouldn't be the only primary
Mm.
cause of
Yes, sir.
things.
Okay, great information on that one, Doc. Way to close it out, man. I appreciate you today.
It's a pleasure being here with you, and I look forward to talking to you again in the future.
Yes, sir. This is KT for KTTV signing out. 100.